Okay, guys, welcome to another episode of the B-Side podcast. I'm super excited to have today with me Rahim Mahtab. Rahim, it's so great to have you.
It's a pleasure to be here, Jacob. Thank you for having me.
Okay, guys, so if you don't know, Rahim is an investor, an OG strategist, collector, and also a member of Dubai Ape Club. So I'm super excited to have you, Rahim, and let's kick it off with how you entered the blockchain space and what brought you into the Web3 domain.
Amazing. For the first time when I got into the blockchain, I think it was around like 2017, 2018. That would be basically when I entered the space. But like I basically bought like I think 2 ETH on an exchange, and after that I kind of like didn't touch it for a very long time. So I properly like got in the trenches actually in end of 2020, early 2021. And the thing that got me into it was actually the NFT space. Because my background is I used to be a filmmaker, photographer, motion graphics artist. And a lot of people don't realize that my big entry in Web3 was actually by through my artist work. So I came in the space as an artist, and end of 2020, start of 2021. And that was around the time where NFTs were just starting to like heat up. And then we had like the Beeple sale, which was for 69 million US dollars, which kind of sent ripples throughout the artistic universe, for a lack of a better word. Every YouTube channel, every Reddit thread, everyone is talking about it. People had polarizing views where a lot of people were like, this makes no sense. Like, or people weren't like a big fan of like Beeple's work or whatever. But the interesting thing was that whether it was you love it or you hate it, everyone was talking about it. So I was like, okay, clearly, like this is the time to get in the trenches and be like, okay, what can I do with my artwork? So yeah, I kind of ended up being very lucky with timing, I would say, because like I was a new artist in this space. My background was more on the commercial side because I used to do fashion photography, products, so with like perfumes and watches and things like that, and do some motion graphics work. So I ended up getting very lucky with timing, and I ended up selling a bunch of my pieces in February of 2021. And then I essentially took all that money and I put it back into the space because I was still running my business in the film industry. So I was like, okay, like this is magic internet money. Let's just put it back and see where the hell this goes. And
Back
then
to the
because I was very
casino.
lucky with back to the casino. And at that time it was just like around like experimenting, like, what's going on. And then I got I think I got my Bored Ape I think a week after it was minted, and then I got Pudgy Penguins. I bought a bunch of art blocks. I got Cool Cats. So yeah, that's how kind of my journey got kickstarted. It was, and I like to highlight this a lot. It was being in the right place at the right time, and that kind of helped me completely go into Web3 full time ever since.
That's a great story, but fast forward 3 years, we are in 2024, and there's like a lot of opinions that look that NFTs are dead. Like this space is no longer super interesting. There are different narratives, right? AI, meme coins, etc. So what do you think about it? Are the NFTs dead, and why?
So what I would say is that I feel like we've given a very narrow definition of what NFTs are in just the last 3 years. Right now, when we talk about NFTs, we are looking at it from like Bored Apes and like CryptoPunks and like art projects and stuff. But I think like NFTs is a technology. If you just like zoom out, what is it doing in its fundamental? It's proving ownership through something that you can own in a wallet that can have a visual element. That's like the essential, like the basic definition of it. And so I believe like it can expand into like so many more things, whether you want to have like ownership of like a fractional watch or a car tomorrow. You want to do like ticketing ecosystems. You want to have like B2C customer, instead of like building a database on email. You're basically collecting, you're giving visual points or visual reward systems that actually has like a way more contextual value to Jacob or to someone else. Let's say if you are buying clothes from a particular store or someone's buying makeup from a particular store. So I think like NFTs, and we've just like scratched the surface of what do they really mean by the technology, because I would argue that in some ways we are coming to a point where we need something like NFTs like way more than we've ever needed before, especially with like the whole AI thing coming in. Now we've come to the point where it's become harder and harder to authenticate the source and the reliability of a particular piece of even journalism. And I have like this wild concept. Maybe it's not that wild if you think about it, but it's like I believe that every piece of content that comes out in the next couple of years, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a TikTok video or an Instagram reel, would and could end up coming through the blockchain, because then you're able to prove its source. And if the source says like, okay, this podcast or this piece of medium is coming from Jacob's authenticated address, I can trace it to that source. I can trace a piece of video to CNN or Bloomberg or things like that. And I think that will become like so much more possible on everyday use cases. I still think I think one of the biggest use cases so far we had with NFTs was on the art side. And I still think we solved a very fundamental problem with art and tracing it, and like, you know, how it moved from one place to another, that I feel like people haven't realized because it's just been 3 years. Because authenticating art, because I used to collect art and I've been like an art enthusiast even before Web3, and
Hmm.
authenticating art, and till date you'll be surprised how many auction houses and like institutions get into
Struggle.
like this struggle, and they get into this debacle figuring out whether the particular piece of art or the thing that they're auctioning is actually real or not. So I feel like on the art front, we, especially with like digital works, when we started selling photographs and like films and stuff, it became hard, because back in the days we would do fingerprints to basically
Mm.
authenticate like artworks and stuff. In the digital world, it became very easy to manipulate like a watermark on a particular artwork or a photograph.
Sure.
And we didn't, so we tried to replicate the same idea, that before our watermark was our signature, and now we would end up putting it in the digital world. But that idea didn't make sense, because we are trying to use an old methodology and a new technology which just didn't work. So I think in some ways, and if you Google, you'll find so many cases on like Shutterstock and a lot of media platforms where there's always been dispute about who owns the work, who has the right. There were like platforms. There used to be a platform a while ago called Flickr, and
Hmm.
Flickr used to be a standalone platform, and then Yahoo bought it. And they, so when it was a standalone platform, it had like you had unlimited storage. And then after companies bought it, and I think eventually Yahoo ended up buying it, they ended up limiting the storage space to like 2 GB, and they gave people a very short amount of time to have the data stored on the internet. And they
Hmm.
essentially ended up wiping out all of their data after brief periods. So if you uploaded a photograph on it like 10 years ago, and let's say I downloaded that photograph, and like now I've uploaded it on my Instagram or like, you know, on my own website and stuff, now you don't even have like a digital provenance to prove that, hey, I put that photograph online. Because on the in the digital world, if that platform got wiped away, it would seem that I posted it first, so I own the photograph. And again, like it got like very messy. So I feel like, just coming back to the question, I just feel like we've only scratched the surface. I think art institutions, you have like Christie's and Sotheby's like constantly auctioning art now through NFTs. You know, whether it's been the Ringers, or like, you know, recently we had the Quantum Cat auction from Bitcoin ordinals. So I feel like we are just scratching the surface. Yes, we had like a crazy bubble in 2021, late
Hmm.
2022, but like we're just finding sustainable ideas and like more intricate systems to keep this technology alive, because it's not going anywhere.
Okay, so it seems like we are still early, and you've been, um, one of the front runners, I would say, at the very, very beginning, and you entered the space as an artist. So I'm super curious about your advice and your experiences. Like, what would you advise to the content creators, artists that want to enter this space? What should they do? What should they start with?
I love this question. This is probably one of my favorite questions to answer, because one of the things and I talk about this quite often, is I want people who are entering this space, especially artists, to realize to not see blockchain and like this whole newfound world just as a medium, but as a mechanism. And what do I mean by that is that I think, like, to me, like art is about culture, right? And
Hmm.
today's culture, if you were to define today's culture, is technology. So we are fusing with technology, and you see every single industry fusing that way, right? You go to the food and beverage industry, you have like a whole molecular gastronomy thing happening, which is a fusion of tech and food.
Hmm.
You go to the fashion business, you're seeing like a merging of fashion and tech. So I feel like in every industry we are kind of merging the two, and I think the
Hmm.
art world is doing similar. So I think one of the ways to kind of be ahead of the curve is realize that, okay, when you merge with technology, there are ways and there is possibility for us to do things with technology which we've never done before. And like, and that's how we can make like art more progressive. Like, how can we add like an element of technology in it to maybe evolve our art, or that every time like the art moves from one wallet to another, there's almost something that gets transcribed on that particular artwork that says that, oh, Rahim owned it, and then Jacob owned it, and there's like a signature that comes. Also, it changes color, or sometimes like what people like Jack Butcher or a couple of people are doing, where they're including mechanisms where it involves community interaction, where a bunch of people come together and they burn artworks together to get a rarer one. And I feel like building all like these mechanics kind of like makes you realize that, okay, the blockchain technology has so much more potential, and like to stay ahead of the curve. Like I feel like I have this wild theory that collecting art has always been like a very elitist thing. We usually saw people in their 40s, 50s who are like very well off buying art. And this has been the case for like the longest time. I have a belief that this new technology has a chance to kind of change that. We can get like younger people in their 20s, in their 30s buying art. You can get people who are on the more nerdier side of the tech, who are like developers and like design things and stuff, for a lack of a better word. You could get interested them in art by including those mechanisms and being like, okay, you know what? When the art moves from one block to another, there's actually the block number that gets stamped on the artwork and stuff. So I feel like we have this opportunity to kind of bring in a whole new group of people, and like to stay ahead of the curve is what I would say is artists to understand the NFT space, understand the blockchain tech, speak to developers. You have to realize that when you're moving from a world where in the previous world, in the traditional art world, you have like art institutions, you have curators, you have all these people who are kind of, yes, they're taking a cut, but they're also helping you get into the industry. They're doing a lot of the back end work. If you're going to be an independent artist through the NFT space and not go through an auction house, which is something a lot of people aren't a big fan of, then you realize then you have to be your own art curator. You have to be your own art institution. You have to do all of those things yourself. Then you realize that, okay, if I am one artist who's trying to stand out of 10,000 other artists, what do I need to do to be ahead of the curve? And this is where I go, like, understand the technology, understand different contract levels, understand why someone would buy something on Solana compared to like Ethereum, compared to, I don't know, Tezos and things like that. So I feel like, yeah, it's a new paradigm. Don't use it as a medium. Just don't see it like, oh, you know what? I have a new way to sell my art and stuff. Yes, that's a very simplified version of it, and you can use that. But I feel like the world is changing so much more, and you have the opportunity to be early in the space and understand it. So don't underestimate the tech side of it, and educate yourself on how the entire industry works.
Yeah, I think you're on the spot here that you have to be capable of understanding the technical aspects of it and also be up to date with that. I mean, recently what we've noticed is that there was a huge boom of tokens being released on Solana. Then Solana died. Then we are now moving to Base, etc. Those second layers and sometimes the third layers are, just popping like mushrooms after the rain. So it's just pretty complicated, even for the people that are basically, full time on it to keep up. So I can imagine for people that are, less techy, more into their own, let's say, creative work, it could be a challenge at the very beginning. So, but I think, as you mentioned, for the independent creators, I think to some extent it's just necessary to also go through this learning curve and try to get a grasp of it. But coming back to those manias that happened recently, I would say the last couple of weeks was pretty crazy. I think it started with BOME, one of the coins that was launched on Solana that raised like millions, and then all the other meme coins followed. Like there was basically an explosion of meme coins. So would you mind just explaining what are the meme coins and why people put like millions and millions of dollars into those coins?
So I think like people underestimate the value of what meme coins really represent. I was recently talking about this, that I think as an art collector, as an someone who's like a big enthusiast of that industry, to me, and this is just my personal opinion, meme coins are a form of performance art. And what do I mean by that? I'm not trying to romanticize the idea, but the fundamental principle is behind it is the same, is that our industry, the Web3 industry, is so well aware. And like the more deeper you get, the more you realize that the regular financial institution does not make sense. They print
Hmm,
money whenever they
it's
want.
true.
They will like increase taxes and stuff. There are people like, when you hear, I recently had someone, they were like, oh, they were actually getting a promotion at their work, but they asked them to not to give them that promotion because they would fall under a higher tax bracket. So they would actually end up paying to the government more than they are right now. So they would end up with lesser money whilst being promoted. So you have all these like bizarre rules and regulations that exist in the world that make absolutely no sense. However, the world has convinced us that, like, this is a system we should abide by, that the US or any other country came up with, and this is what we should define our currencies and our economies based on, which makes no sense because they have a lot of like problems with it. And meme coins are almost like a performance art statement, which is saying that we'll release something that's silly, that's stupid. In fact, the more stupider it is, for lack of a better word, it
The
actually
more
becomes
money it
even,
gets.
yeah, because it becomes more comical, because now we are like, okay, we have this con called dog with hat, and it's so ridiculous. It's a dog wearing a hat, but we've cumulatively decided that this holds value, and it's not a couple of people. Now you have like 100,000 on-chain holders, and this is not even talking about how many people exist on centralized exchanges who are part of this movement. And at the end of the day, this is the concept of money, right? Like back in the days when we had the barter system, when we realized that, okay, hey, Jacob, I'm going to paint your house and you're going to like do gardening for me. That's how we worked. So we had like this natural consensus that this is the industry and this is the form of currency we will use. If tomorrow you and I and like a whole group of people decided, like, a croissant would be like the currency and stuff, and we just carry croissants around, and then like I'm like, okay, I want to buy this particular thing from you, I'm going to give you 5 croissants. And if we cumulatively decide as a society that this is going to be a form of currency, that becomes a form of currency. And we have countless examples of like, using rocks and like different forms of metals throughout history doing the same. And that to be what meme coins are, that if a group of people, and we're not talking about 500 group of people who in one chat room decided to turn this into a thing, you're talking about thousands of people around the world who are putting millions in dollars in and out of this ecosystem. A lot of these people are anonymous. You don't even know who they are, where they live, what gender, what occupation and stuff. So you have like a very transparent, no biased metric that develops over time. That becomes a thing. And I also say this, like, meme coins at some point become culture coins, and there's a transition they go through by being sustained every single day, because meme coins can be created essentially out of like nothing. If you create like an economy around it, you can create it around like a cat or a dog or like like a plate or whatever. But like you have to realize that a lot of times people create things that also essentially end up having no value. So I think like after a point, meme coins, certain meme coins, only a fraction of them turn into culture coins. And this is what I would call today as like Doge and like Shiba Inu and like Boom and like Pepe. And these end up becoming like a very, very big thing compared to a lot of the other meme coins that probably don't survive longer periods and stuff.
Because what I've noticed is that there is so much rush into those coins. I mean, people are basically throwing money with no, you know, with no even sometimes expectations whatsoever around it. Like, because once you send those money, they may never come back to you. Like, even the token may not start off. But at the same time, I think part of the people is in this gold rush because of opportunistic, approach to it. Because it's a lottery, one
Mm,
meme coin pops up, the other one goes down, and meme coins were defined um, to some extent as coins without a utility, right? Because we have got the
mm,
projects with the utility building something. And meme coins were just, as you mentioned, the cultural element of it. But I think those days, I think the meme coins even are starting to build like a culture and also different utilities around them. I think that even Vitalik tweeted about it. the meme coins that are going to be great are going to be the ones with a real life utility. I don't know if you've heard about Pepe Coin.
Yes, of
Those guys
course.
are back from 2016, and now
Mm.
they are also connected to Based AI, which is like a different coin and AI project. And they are starting doing really good, but in comparison to those huge coins that you mentioned, they are still pretty early. But do you think that this is also one of the directions that we might be seeing in the next couple of weeks, months?
So I think the concept of meme culture is going to be way bigger than we've ever thought, at least in my opinion. And this is not
Mm,
even just talking in Web3. I used to have like create content in Web2 world, right? Now you're seeing brands and companies that used to hire photographers, models, stylists, agencies involved for like thousands of dollars. They would put out a piece of content, and like this content would be aesthetically beautiful, and like they would end up getting like a 10% engagement rate. And then you all of a sudden you post like, like a video with, let's say, like Hezbollah or like or like something else and stuff, and then you realize that you have like a 45-60% engagement rate and stuff. And you can see this if you go on like Instagram or TikTok. If you see some of the newer brands who are doing like this new age young Gen Z marketing, they get so
mhm.
much more engagement than these like multinational companies that are worth like millions of dollars. Even if you end up ever, and I think this is a fun exercise if anyone wants to actually look into this, that if you ever go to Instagram and look up like, some of the biggest companies, like take McDonald's, for example, look at their engagement and you'll be surprised. You'll be like, wait, how is a company that's so famous around the world, has millions of followers on Instagram, barely has engagement on Instagram? Like, what the hell is
Mm,
happening? So I think like meme culture in general is seeping into every single industry because I think it's the language of the internet. You have the meme where two Spider-Mans are pointing at each other. I think
yeah.
that, yeah, I think I call memes as the language of the digital world, because you
Mm,
and we don't have to speak English to know what that meme means. So it's almost kind of in some ways uniting us, and we are creating like this new language without words. And I feel there's some beauty in that idea. And this is why I think like there will be like a lot more meme coins that will pop. I think it'll gather a lot more interest. When you were talking about Pepe coins and like, how they're building utility through that meme coin angle, I think a lot of even chains, for example, have realized that like one of the best ways to onboard people is through culture. And like take AVAX, for example. AVAX Foundation started this thing called Culture Catalysts, and they call NFTs and memes as culture catalysts to onboard people
mhm.
into the blockchain, into their ecosystem. And I think that's a very interesting metric, because if you look at historically also, if you look at like one of the first apps that came on the iPhone app store that became super famous was a beer opening app. So it, like, it would just have like a sound, and you would, once you turn the app, the beer would
Mm.
fall. But it had no utility, it had no use, but a lot of people were downloading the app for the culture and fun side of it. So I feel like a lot of companies, brands, even when they're building products, they've realized the value of culture. They've realized the value of meme culture, and they're using this to channel and build ideas and products around it. And I think it's just going to be bigger and bigger. I've created a video about this before, but I think like I think political campaigns, I think like, other financial institutions, everyday consumer brands, they are going to delve into so much more meme culture. And the more meme culture grows in Web2, the more crazier it'll get in Web3.
That's amazing. But talking about the market and the general directions, I would say. So the meme coin is one thing, but I would say that the bigger conversation happens regarding whether this cycle is different. We had Bitcoin halving. We have got Bitcoin halving happening in a couple of days, and for the first time, we've reached an all-time high before halving, right? So weird things are happening. We have got institutional investors on board. We have got very little retail interest so far. So how do you think about it? Is this going to be another bubble that bursts, or do we have more stable floor right now, and things will, unwrap very differently?
I think there are like a couple of things that are very different this cycle. And like, let's start with a couple of things. So you mentioned how like Bitcoin reached an all-time high before the halving event. And I've been talking about this that like, and I didn't talk about this, but my OG background, like by education, I'm actually a scientist. And
Mm,
in science, we talk about when you have like a couple of random predictable behaviors, then you start to anticipate what the result is going to be. So if we've already had a couple of cycles where people have kind of the blueprint that, okay, Bitcoin goes like way higher after the halving, that when you see this happening over and over again, I I kind of had like a hunch of from like a year and a half ago that I feel like people will start accumulating way earlier because they kind of know that it happens and stuff. And when a whole group of people decide to do it a bit earlier, then you realize the price starts to move way faster than we've seen. So I think that kind of, in some ways, probably changed. The financial institutions coming in, like like this, when you have like people like Fidelity and BlackRock entering this space, it kind of puts that legitimate stamp on, okay, like this is something
yeah.
real. They kind of control the world in some way, right? Having owning companies and like putting investments almost in every single thing that you can imagine. So I feel like like crypto has always had like a bad rep on the
TradFi.
internet when you
Yeah.
in TradFi and stuff. And like now when you have if governments don't support it, TradFi hates it, so you're bound to believe that there is something not legit about it. But now when you go on the internet and you realize that some of the biggest people in the world when it comes to moving money are actually invested in it, so I feel like it puts a stamp on it that, okay, guys, things have changed. So I think that's definitely like the amount of volumes we have, which is millions of dollars coming in on a regular basis, that's definitely moving the needle a lot. And I think the third thing that has happened, in my view, before our proposition to getting people in crypto, we were telling them how amazing and decentralized and limited in supply Bitcoin is. So we were trying to push the idea of Bitcoin by showing you how better this is compared to the fiat world and stuff.
Mm,
I think in COVID, I think everyone realized, well, in COVID things went crazy, right? So we thought, okay, like people were printing money, countries were printing money and stuff. After that, we were like, okay, 2-3 years later, we'll start to get better and stuff. But countries have gotten worse, right?
yeah.
And now we've suddenly realized that instead of just having to do this, this has started to go down even more. So the gap has become so
We've
much. So
got,
like now, yes. So now all of a sudden, instead of saying that, oh, why Bitcoin is better, we start talking about how dollar is not what we should be looking at and stuff. So now we've almost gone from talking about peace to an anti-war movement, if that makes sense. They kind of
yeah.
fundamentally say the same thing, but one is talking more focused on the problem, which is anti-war, and the other one is talking on the solution, which is peace. And I think that's a very interesting thing because like you see like inflation high at like all-time high and stuff. You've seen like the housing crisis has gotten crazier. Student debts have gone crazier. It's become way harder in the US, for example, to make a living, and it's been affected in every single sector. You're seeing way more students and even high school students drop out a bit earlier because they have to look after their siblings or whatever. So they end up taking jobs earlier and stuff. So now you're seeing that the entire world is crumbling. Everyone thought that, okay, once we come out of the pandemic, so the pandemic played a huge role in the last cycle for us to kind of really get our feet into the space and realize that, okay, crypto, everyone was at home, so they had nothing to do, but it also kind of showed that, okay, like maybe there is something to it. Now a couple of years after it, you realize that, okay, if anything, things have gotten worse in some scenarios. Healthcare has gotten worse in certain places of the world. You have like way more poverty. People are struggling with like education way more. That's when you're like, okay, clearly now Bitcoin makes so much more sense because it's limited in supply. Now you also have financial institutions getting it. So I feel like in some ways the fundamentals have changed so much on like a different level. You see a lot of the younger crowd, even when they're not talking about crypto or Bitcoin, they've become smart enough to recognize the problems that exist in the world. And
Mm,
I think that's a stepping stone. I've been like on Twitter, I've been seeing a lot of these videos recently where a lot of like young high school college students who just graduated are talking about that they're barely making living and they don't have time to do anything. They go like they're driving an hour, they go to work, they're coming back like like they're talking or like walking around at their job. Then they go get groceries, and then they barely have time to work out, and then they go to bed and stuff. And they've been talking about how ridiculous this world is, like, and there's a whole group of people in the comment section. They were talking about that, oh, these youngsters are being entitled, and this is how the real world works, and we should accept that and stuff. But there was a whole group of people talking about, you know what? These kids are actually right. Like, why have we accepted this world and this lifestyle that you're giving up time to spend with your loved ones, with your family, with your friends, with your own health, with your own skills, at the expense of, like, oh, like my manager asked me to come in early, or I need to make, like, 100 extra dollars today or whatever. And I think the younger generation is realizing that, like, some of the things that we've accepted in society aren't things we should have accepted in society altogether and stuff. Like, I think the idea of, and maybe I'm like a kind of an extremist when it comes to that, but I've worked in the corporate world. I used to be a scientist, so I've worked in like pharmaceutical companies and stuff. But like this whole idea of, like, people slogging their life for 5-6 days a week to get like one day off, and that's when you decide, do you want to do something for yourself? Do you want to be with your loved ones and think, like, I feel like the world is realizing how a lot of the things that we do is not the way to do it. And I think decentralization and changing the way how we've done is speaking to those people. Even if they're not talking about crypto yet, they understand the idea of institutions and student loans and governments telling us what to do, what not to do, is not the way to move forward. So they've recognized the problem. And like, just like in psychology, they say that finding a solution, the step one is recognizing that you have a problem. So I feel like in some ways, we are in such a great position for people in crypto.
Yeah, because there are a couple of things, right? There is a huge distrust towards the governments, mainstream media, and all this stuff. That's one thing. The other thing is that we have got the technology that is already proven working and is doing great. And the third thing is that we have got an actual medium, which is Bitcoin, that actually transports your purchasing power into the future. And for the last couple of years, it's been just doing fantastic. But my question also is, how do you think about this particular asset, Bitcoin, with regards to the whole space? Do you think that there is a chance for any other coin or technology to actually dethronize Bitcoin, or is it here to stay? It's a gold 2.0. What do you think is going to happen in the next couple of years?
I think, yeah, that's a very interesting conversation. It's something that I've been thinking about a lot. So for the longest time, Bitcoin was seen as this, like, this financial chain. It was just like a store of value. People were buying and selling Bitcoin. And like, when it came to building out products or apps or NFTs or any protocol for that matter, everything was being built on Ethereum or Solana and stuff. So that's when the question became that, okay, at some point, do we see that the value of all these like EVM chains or like Solana, where people are building products? So let's say we have like political voting on there, or we have like a lot more B2C solutions, that would we see ETH getting close to BTC or even surpassing it and stuff. So I think it's been an interesting conversation. You obviously now see people building on Bitcoins. You have ordinals, we have like BRC20s, now you have like runes coming out right after the halving. I still think like Bitcoin ends up essentially moving the markets. Like the sentiment around Bitcoin becomes very fundamental, because it's almost like the gold standard for our industry. Because I still think a lot of the movement of Bitcoin is controlled. Not, I don't want to use the word controlled. Is still done by people who have like big amounts of money that they've made in the traditional world. So like when you're putting millions of dollars that comes from TradFi, you have to realize that those people work from TradFi perspectives. So if there are rate cuts, there's inflation rising, like CPI numbers are coming separately,
they react,
whatever, that will depend and kind of like move the Bitcoin price. So I think like for a very long time, I do see it. Like I think at the end of the day, we are social beings that need something to look at and follow. We've done this throughout history and stuff, right? Even a pack of wolves likes to follow a particular leader in the wolf pack. So I feel like in some ways, I think Bitcoin is going to keep being that. But I do see probably like, like the speed at which things move, that could completely like differ as time goes by, especially with like ETH ETF being something that's being talked about, I think
Yeah.
if Ethereum ends up having like an ETF, there's a good chance that the gap between the ratio between ETH and BTC could like drastically change, and ETH could run up a lot more than Bitcoin will in the short term.
Do you think that there's a big good chance for Ethereum to get this ETF this year?
Well, I mean, like I follow like a lot of these experts who've like based their life in this
Yeah,
space, especially on the ETF side. They've been talking about that it's very early to say anything because they haven't heard positive or negative around it. At some point, so you obviously have the SEC, which kind of hates crypto, and they
sure.
specifically hate ETH way more than they've hated BTC and stuff. So you obviously have that knife hanging over our heads. But I still believe that at the end of the day, as conspiratorial I'm gonna sound, that like at the end of the day, a lot of money is being controlled by like these like BlackRock and Fidelity and like all these like Grayscale, all these like big
They will push
institutions.
things forward.
Yes, so if they want to get into ETFs, they want to get this thing. If they are backing political campaigns and things like that, they will get to move the needle, and then the government has to kind of see how does the SEC position itself in this whole conversation.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, Rahim, it was so great to have this conversation with you. Let me just wrap it up. So, guys, if you are at the very beginning of your Bitcoin journey and don't know where to start, please make sure to visit me at bitcoinfocus.com and schedule a free call. I'm here to help. And if you guys want to follow Rahim, I'll put to the footnotes your directories. It was so great to have you. Really love the conversation and hope to see you quite soon because we are just about to kick off the Dubai Blockchain Week.
Yes, it's going to be awesome. I'm excited for the world to see what Dubai is capable of. Web3 is going to be awesome here. Crypto is going to be awesome here. So I'm excited. Thank you for having me on this podcast. And yeah, looking forward to seeing you soon next week.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Take care.